So, I am your typical Star Trek nerd. This is a response video to Resurrected Starships about the Federation versus the Galactic Empire. Now, the guy, he claims to be a fan of both, which I am. His knowledge of both Star Wars and Star Trek seemed quite good. The problem with it is that I'm having here is that his knowledge of Star Trek seemed to be TNG. He had a little bit from DS9, and he even mentioned stuff from Voyager, but there were some technologies that he missed. Sorry for the shakiness of the camera. Quantum torpedoes, never mentioned. Ablative hull armor from Voyager, which if this was in the 25th century, all of those technologies probably would have been adapted by that time. Voyager didn't have the big issue with adapting the ablative hull armor to Voyager from the shuttle. I think the only problem they had with was the stealth technology. Not to mention Captain Janeway is a very meticulous captain. When she went into the transwarp hub, she would have definitely scanned it. Now, I do agree that hyperdrive is a hell of a lot faster than warp drive, based on some force, the whales and stuff that he mentioned, which is kind of cool. I didn't know that. That's some pretty cool stuff. Little bit of Star Wars lore that I'm unaware of. I gotta say I'm more of a Star Trek fan just because of the practicality of it, but it's also based on our laws of physics, so it's changed from galaxy to galaxy. And if Darth Vader's force powers were weakened here, that explained a lot. That was one of the biggest threats I thought about, was a Sith in the Federation space. That was kind of cool. But what I want to mention here is Voyager's ablative hull armor. The fact that the Federation is nowhere near as vast as the Galactic Empire, and they call it the Galactic Empire because it takes up the entire galaxy. Federation does not. When Voyager entered the transwarp hub, in a comment that I posted on his page below, I mentioned that Voyager, I did some adjustments, just guesses, traveled through that transwarp hub about 40,000 light years from home. Then you've got to take the 27,000 light years that it takes from across Federation space. This is information I looked up from Star Trek Canon. So you add about 60,000 light years, and Voyager still would have been several years from home once it got back to the Alpha Quadrant, but it would have been close. But the transwarp corridor that opened up on the other side of the transwarp hub was less than a light year from Earth. Kind of convenient, in my point, and I think the episode was rushed, but it made some really good points. Now, Voyager was able to travel roughly 67,000 light years in the matter of what I would guess to be about an hour, because it wasn't in there all day battling that Borg cube. Now, these transwarp hubs is kind of a connection between Star Wars and Star Trek that's pretty interesting to me. I don't know if it's a blatant ripoff of Star Wars, and I will admit that some ripoffs of Star Trek have definitely shown up in Star Wars, but I've never really noticed one. Transwarp conduits sound very similar to hyperdrive corridors. And the mapping of them would have had to have been done over millennia. The point that he made about not being able to map the hyperdrive corridors in Federation space was interesting. And not to mention that these creatures never showed up in Federation space that we know of. So it's possible that hyperdrive corridors are very similar premise to transwarp. Now, the Borg have advanced transwarp capabilities, and what I mentioned about Janeway scanning these is she's a scanner. She's an observer. She's a scientist above all else. So even in conflict, the Voyager scanners would be fully active, especially in a combat situation, to keep track of the sphere that was chasing them through the corridor. Now, I know not everybody's seen the episode, but Voyager was still managed to travel, 67,000 light years in the matter of, I say, an hour and a half max, fighting off a Borg cube in the corridor while it was destroying the transwarp hub. But the transwarp hub was just a means to an end. Federation scans and scientists being what they are when they get a hold of new technology, it would say roughly 30 years, if it's the 25th century, 30, 40 years have passed since the conflict with Praetor Shinzon, the Voyager getting home. So it's pretty smart to say that at least a decent transwarp network would have been constructed. Now, 25th century is a 100-year span, so This could have been mid-25th century. I don't know. I'd love to see his response on this. But my reply is simple. I want you to do me a favor if you have the time. And I understand that your 3D rendering is a pain in the ass, as you mentioned, and it takes time. Make the adjustments for the current time with Federation. Put them to the 25th century, but give them the technology that they've discovered since TNG and Deep Space Nine. Now, being that the Dominion War ended in the late half of the 24th century, it would be kind of interesting to see that the advances the Bajorans made at joining the Federation. Now, Cisco did warn against joining the Federation at that time, but their world wouldn't be as antiquated and undefended. Not to mention that the tech comparisons to Star Trek weapons, to Star Wars weapons, are vastly different. And I know he was trying to tell a story, and I appreciate the story. I thought it was great. But go ahead and make these adjustments to your timeline here, to your technology, and go ahead and do me a favor and think about Section 31, which is like the Federation CIA, except, it does exist, it doesn't exist. But they have had no problem breaking Federation law, as I mentioned in the comment. No problem at all. So as soon as Picard downloaded his sensor data from the conflict with Shinzon, the scans of the ship, the tactical analysis and all of that, as well as the Thalaron generator design, I don't see a problem with Section 31 building a bunch of these ships. Especially with the perfect cloak, it would be the ultimate weapon for Section 31 to protect the Federation. So Section 31 would definitely get involved. I think Q being involved, that was a hell of a touch. I liked that because I mentioned that on his first video because it was a two-parter, that Q wouldn't just stand by and allow the Federation to be destroyed. Q is kind of like the Federation's like Q's pet. So Q doing this on purpose. Q has always seemed malicious, but if you look underneath the surface, he's more of a guiding father that kind of beats his kid with a stick to teach him. So that's a pretty bad analysis, but I think it's pretty good. I mean, he threw the Federation into the hands of the Borg. So I'd like to see what you think. Comment below, subscribe if you want to. Not really a big deal. I'm not a YouTuber. It's just kind of something I do for fun. But this is definitely my reply of resurrected starships. So tell me what you think. Thank you.